by many, and except for one incident in the book, which is speculative and vicarious, it is simply a priest's direct personal experiences with exorcism during his pastoral work. As usual in St. Lucia, much has been said of the work, even though, as usual, few have read it. Should the Society's dirty linen be expressed in public? Should the man of God be so apparently obsessed with the occult and the supernatural? Should the privacy, secrecy, and confidentiality associated with confession to a priest have guided the disclosures? What is the redeeming value of the work? I don't have answers to any of these, but Father must have, and in any case you can read the book and come to your own conclusion. Father Lambert disclosed the release of the book at my wife's 70th birthday anniversary about 4 months ago. It was not in St. Lucia yet, at least not to the public. And I told him that when I got to Florida, I would get a copy, and that I did. Incidentally, I read the book during Halloween. I had read many years before a St. Lucian doctor's account of his own experiences with that subject, and while it gave me the chills, I learned a great deal from those disclosures with that early experience. I had my own trepidation about going into this one, but I decided that if my cousin priest, who has given me communion, prayed with me and counseled me and can write it, why should I not read it? I have no reason to doubt the direct disclosures, for if I did, I would have lost faith in God's agents and institutions. So I read it, but on every occasion, I prayed to God for guidance and strength to protect myself from the possibility of any infection from the Ebola of evil spirits. At the end, I left with the knowledge that exorcism is ritually ordained in the church, that knowledge is a God-given free good that is available to us and used under his guidance, and on condition that we use it positively for spiritual upliftment, and that the shared experiences of mankind are intended and can be positive lessons for all of us. I am also left with the strengthened faith in my church. For I argue that if the system is dichotomized between good and evil, I would prefer to be on the side of good, driving out evil. Bear in mind that only God and the devil are at the extremes, and that all of us, in varying degrees, is somewhere in between. The Bible told us, Jesus himself said it, who is without sin, let him cast the first stone. Moreover, I speculate that if the principalities of evil endeavor to use the rituals, the symbols, and even our own faithful for their demonic celebrations of evil, then our church is on the side of the right and good, with a great deal of authenticity and power. I commend the book to you and wish you happy reading under God's guidance, and exhort you to use this and other knowledge positively for good and personal and social upliftment. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. St. Rose, for your comments after you've read the book. and we will hear more from other people. We will now call upon Mrs. Louvette Louisi, who will give us an introduction of In Turbulent Waters.
Good afternoon. With your permission, your grace, and the head table, can I adopt the protocol established? Thank you, Lord. I just want to say that I don't think there is need for an introduction because Mr. Mario St. Rose has done it beautifully. And basically, this is really a sneak peek because we can't tell you much. We want you to buy the book. Just to say that when Father asked me to read the book, of course I had a bit of trepidation as well. But what was important to me is the fact that although I am aware that there is God and there is Satan, there is good and there is evil, I want to disagree slightly to say that they are not at the same extreme. God is far superior. They are not equal enemies. So, with that in mind, I read the book. I told Father I would call him anytime I got afraid. I would call because, of course, it was delving into something that for a lot of us, with our intellectual capacity and the sort of society that we live in, we sort of rationalize everything, and we almost sort of want to put the devil out of existence, because it makes us uncomfortable. And reading the book, I think, is important because it sort of asks us questions, We're knowing the truth. We're knowing a little more on what happens in the other realm, whether that in some way would change the way we live. Also, how we face our fears. What are the things we are afraid of? And I want to tell you to buy it. It is provocative. It may be a little scary, but it is the sort of truth you just would need to have in order to have an approach to life. It escalates a bit for those of us who are probably fearful and always wondered about that dark side. But it exposes the depravity of the human heart. That's our heart. That's all of us here. The potential for us to move on either side when we have choices to make. What I like about the book most, though, is that it culminates with that ray of hope. It speaks to the sacramental element of the church, that beauty of the church. Mother Church is available to all so that we can put order, we can put on that God's armor to be able to resist the devil and his tactics. I just want to say that Pope Paul VI, you may see how I know about Pope Paul VI, and I was probably about a few years old when, the Pope was around. But he was concerned at one point that the devil's name had disappeared from the pulpits of the church. And even today we see little attention is being paid because we don't like to face uncomfortable things. But what the Pope was telling us, and which is what I think Father has been brave enough to do now, what we are supposed to do, discuss the devil, expose his wiles, bring forth the light of truth. For ignoring evil, claiming that it is too scary, what it does, it just keeps us in darkness. So we are all duty bound, and maybe our duty today is to purchase the book so that we can have a little knowledge. And in that way, that smoke of Satan that the Pope was a little concerned about, that had penetrated the temple of God, we may be able, through that mist, as our shepherd king here has spoken, he has given us that strength to know that he who is in us is greater than he who is of the world. So fight, children of light, you the few who are able to see or are willing to see. So I want to encourage you, purchase the book, read the book, nothing to fear. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your introductory comments and your encouragement to read the book to everybody. We now call upon Évariste Jean-Marie, who is going to introduce our guest speaker, do an introduction to him.
Protocol being established, but let me just make an addition to that. I want to recognize the presence of the governor of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank and his wife, Lady Linda. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This afternoon's guest speaker is a St. Lucian writer and critic, and perhaps more importantly, in the context of this afternoon's proceedings, is a cultural researcher. His literary works have been published in several Caribbean journals. His work in cultural studies focus on what he describes as a submerged spiritual traditions in the Caribbean, and in particular, St. Lucia. He is currently a lecturer at Sir Arthur Lewis Community College and in the final stages of completing an MPhil dissertation entitled Chebois, you heard me, Chebois, The Nature and Place of Obeah in St. Lucia. Before I introduce the guest speaker, I want to take the opportunity to thank Robert Lee for directing me to the work and selection of today's guest speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to please welcome to the podium Mr. Valdemar Lucien.
Afternoon, everybody. Very pleased to be here and feel very privileged to be here speaking about this book. As Mr. Jean-Marie indicated, I was alerted to the work that Father St. Rose was doing. One night at home, Robert called me and told me that there was something on TV he thinks I should be watching. And I think it was a show with Mr. Jean-Marie and Father, and I believe Miss DeVoe was there as well. And later he asked me about doing the feature address as well as reviewing the book. And I read the book, and it is a very, very important book. And I think that its advent is at a very, very important time for the Roman Catholic faith and the general sensibility of St. Lucia. So my lecture will be looking at various things, and of course it intertwines with my own research. But what I would ask of you is that if it gets provocative at any time, nobody clubs me over the head and kicks me out. In the end, I come in good faith. Concerning the state of their knowledge about Obeah, the Barbados Council in 1789 admitted, and I quote, "Of their arts we know nothing." Despite this early proclamation, Obeah continued to be virulently and violently policed in the Caribbean in one form or another for a century and a half more. Or was this an early proclamation at all? The first Obeah law was passed after Tacky's rebellion in Jamaica around 1682. A law meant, and I quote, "to remedy the evils arising from irregular assemblies of slaves," end of quote. Institutions of power for a long time have shown a reluctance to know what Obeah is and have vacillated between spiritual and secular conceptions of it, both aimed at justifying its obliteration. At one point, they were inclined to believe that these Obeah men were in league with the devil. and others who thought that these Obeah men and women were rationalists who were merely swindling people of their money. Diana Patton's paper, Obeah Acts, charts this evolution of British colonial belief, or some may say superstition, through the British colonial lawmaking concerning this practice. In other cases, persons who have suffered from the certain kind of cultural dislocation that Father St. Rose speaks about constantly in his book, and are seeking to respond to agents and mechanisms that foster that dislocation, have sought to ingratiate or to conceive of Obeah differently. Most immediately in my mind is Trinidadian master artist Leroy Clark's assertion that in his art he is working Obeah, and Jamaican poet Kai Miller's poem that speaks of Obeah as an anti-colonial force, a point of view he shares ironically with the British lawmakers back in the day, although he of course views this anti-colonial spiritual assault as positive, as liberating as perhaps the famous Bois Quément ceremony that preceded the Haitian Revolution. Yet even closer to home, we have the poet John Robert Lee in his poem Lusca, who bemoans his lack of connection with the local law, or rather, distantly admires the connection Derek Walcott seemed to have with these. But even Walcott in his poem White Magic seems to be dealing with these spiritual beings in the same way in which he deals with Greek myth, as something that is useful and worthy, not something that is to be feared. Nor is he a participant in that moral community that does not deny these spirits their complexity.